Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has been going on now for more than 1,390 days, almost 1,400 days, with an estimated 1.2 million Russian military dead or wounded. There are three words Ukrainians follow every day. They carry them in their heart, in their soul, in their minds: survive, endure, and prevail. In this week's episode, we look at how Ukraine's effectively responded to the recent propaganda challenges from both the United States and Russian presidents, calling for Ukrainian presidential elections, challenging President Zelensky's credibility and his support from all Ukrainians. In the second part, we look at Putin's allegations against NATO as a justification to accuse NATO of lying, increasing tensions with Russia, and claiming the role of Russia being the threatened victim. But first, Zelensky's response to Trump and Putin. From experience, I have found that the most effective responses are short, direct, and based on indisputable facts. Not the hyperbole favoured by the US president, who is on record as saying that Zelensky's popularity amongst Ukrainians is as low as 4%. And he justified that by calling for elections. He ignored, obviously, the fact that Ukraine is at war with Russia, and forgot that he was repeating Putin's words from a few months previously, and also forgot that Russia started the war in 2022. Research is the best place to start, and research based on short, direct, focused questions will receive single-syllable direct answers, not hyperbole, just emotion, fact, and history. Kiev International Institute of Sociology is a leading independent private Ukrainian company which works in collaboration with the National University. And Kiev was founded in 1990 as a research centre of Sociological Association of Ukraine. It transformed into a private enterprise in 1992, and its work disciplines include face-to-face interviews and focus groups. Between the 26th of November and the 13th of December 2025, it conducted a series of surveys which addressed the following questions. Do you support President Zelensky? Is now the right time to hold an election? Should the president accept the Trump-Russia peace plan? Three simple questions which gave very clear and direct answers. Do you support President Zelensky? 61% said yes. Is now the right time to hold an election? 9% said yes. If you allow for the 15% undecided, one can assume that 75% of all Ukrainians do not think an election in the middle of the war is right. Should the president accept the Trump-Russian peace plan? 63% said that they are ready to endure the war as long as necessary, which in plain language is no to accepting the Trump-Russian peace plan. This achieves a number of objectives. First of all, it gives you facts, and it gives you indisputable facts that you can refer to. It calls into doubt the honesty and integrity of the opponent. Nothing new there. It demonstrates your willingness and ability to challenge the lies, and this is the Zelensky government and all Ukrainians, to challenge the lies and, more importantly, correct the errors and state your own case. So that, I think, is a case study in how to respond to negative challenges and accusations. Moving on to negative challenges and accusations, the same theme continues with Putin accusing NATO of an arms build-up and boasts of Russia's nuclear forces. So it's what you call Putin's propaganda. Putin said Russia would take more land in Ukraine by force if Kiev and European politicians, who he casts as young pigs, it's a nice way to be diplomatic, isn't it? Or Schertz, who refused to engage over the US proposal for a peace settlement. The Russian president also added that European leaders had joined in on efforts by the previous US administration of President Joe Biden. This is an attempt to get closer to Trump, I think, to break up Russia. Now, from memory, I'm not aware that Biden or any American administration since whenever has ever tried to break up Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022 after 8 years of fighting between Russian-backed separatists and Ukrainian troops in Donbass. So therefore, this has been going on since basically 2014. The war has triggered the biggest confrontation between Moscow and the West since the depths of the Cold War. Putin told Russia's top generals at their annual meeting of the Defense Ministry that Russia was advancing on all fronts and would achieve its aims either by force or through diplomacy. Well, calling your diplomatic friends pigs is no guaranteed way of achieving anything diplomatically. Quote unquote, if the opposing side and their foreign patrons refuse to engage in substantive discussions, Russia will achieve liberation of its historical lands by military means, quote unquote, Vladimir Putin. One should add here that Ukraine was established before Rus, the original Rus, sort of 800 years ago. So therefore, how you can claim these Ukraine as being traditional lands or historical lands is news to me. Moving on, you recall Germany and NATO recently voiced their expectations and concerns of a future war with Russia sometime in the next 5 years. The next piece of Putin propaganda allows us to review a statement which is interesting, as it is a rare example of Putin responding when his propaganda is challenged. Note, he denies the fact that there's any threat of war and spins the build-up of an arms by NATO as the justification for any move that Russia may or may make in the future. Quote unquote again, Vladimir Putin, Europeans were having fears about an inevitable clash with Russia driven into their heads, and they were being told they needed to prepare for a major war. I have already said many times this is a lie, a delusion about some imaginary Russian threat to European countries, but they are doing this quite deliberately. Forgive me, President Putin, but your invasion of Ukraine, is that not a threat to Europe? Next step after that, what? Romania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, wherever, I don't know. Anyway, Putin accused NATO states of actively building up and modernizing their offensive weapons and creating and deploying new types of weapons, including outer space. That's news to me. Is it news to you? At the same time, he stressed that Russia's nuclear shield is more modern than the nuclear component of any official nuclear-armed state. Now, what does he mean by official nuclear-armed state? Think that one out. He added 92% is the modernity of our nuclear forces and claimed that no other nuclear country in the world has anything like this. Translated into Putin speak, everything and anything you say I will use to my advantage. His next response was to a previous statement made by this podcast in which we estimated the cost of the war to Russia so far, against Ukraine that is, was estimated between 111 and 140 billion US. To take the high ground and use his US spend as a threat of future defense or attack, and to repudiate the statement, qualified the following by saying, in Putin's Russia, the figure will never be known. But he has claimed that he plans to spend 138 billion on the war, the Ukrainian war, this year, which is interesting because best estimates it was 140 billion for 3.5 plus years. Russian Defense Ministry, therefore, take it with a pinch of salt. Take it with a deep breath and don't believe everything you hear. The Russian Defense Ministry has, for the first time, disclosed the budget spending directly linked to the special military operation. They still haven't dropped that term insofar as Ukraine. They say the figures included in a presentation by Russia's Defense Minister, Andrei Belosov, show the cost reaching 5.1% of Russia's GDP in 2025. If you believe that, that's fine. Until now, only overall budget spending under the heading of national defence has been available. Latest data from the finance minister says that there was 13.5 trillion rubles, 167.7 billion US dollars, has been spent on national defence in 2025. Again, an interesting term when an invasion and aggression against a neighbouring country is referred to as national defence. This roughly means 82% of that sum has been spent directly on the war against Ukraine. One again has to ask the question, how much of that was actually spent on the war, or how much of that has gone into somebody else's pocket? To put these figures into perspective, I believe them to be false. That's a personal opinion, simply and purely for the fact that due to falling oil prices, along with the strengthening of the Russian currency, all are set to slash the oil and gas revenues of Russia by almost 50%. By the time we get to December 25, as compared to exactly a year before, to the lowest level since August 2020. One has to remember that these revenues support and pay for Russia's wars, because they have had more than one in recent times. Moving on and coming to the end of this podcast, and returning to our opening story on Putin's rejection of the warning of a potential Russian war in tiny steps. There is a comprehensive, detailed and inspirational article published by Prof of Ukraine from former top NATO officials Gabor Khlody, Jamie Shea and Miroslava Gongadze, a senior Ukrainian journalist and political figure, who jointly send a series of warning shots to European leadership. I'm not going to read the whole article because it is extensive and lengthy, but there are some salient and important points that I wish to refer to. So here are a series of short extracts from their article. Europe is not just Ukraine is at war. Okay, so Europe, not just Ukraine, is at war. Russia's hybrid operations across Europe reach the level of a sustained, low-intensity hybrid war against Europe and NATO warn us that failing to acknowledge that these low-level, under-the-threshold active measures by Russia across Europe and beyond constitute the modern reality of a covert war. So, basically, Europe, directly, indirectly, covertly, or otherwise, Russia is at war with Europe, and we have to recognise that and respond accordingly. This is compounded by the recent US national security strategy demanding from Europe that it stands on its own feet. If I do a quote, Russian threats are targeted, actions against Europe are not isolated. They form a centrally planned and managed campaign designed to destabilize European societies, test Europe's resilience and resolve, and weaken the transatlantic bond. All of these points we have covered previously and referred to previously in the Russia Unmasked podcast. Hybrid warfare campaigns work best in polarized societies, and what we are witnessing through these measures is exacerbating polarization, eroding trust, and dividing communities. Think of your own society, think of your own country, and think what is happening. It is not an accident by design and plan. None of it is new. These tactics have been part of Russia's active measures for a century. Okay? 100 years. The novelty lies in the scale, frequency, growing boldness, and openness of these operations. The purpose is clear: deter Europe from supporting Ukraine by weakening public support, prepare the ground for future escalation, and crucially, sow doubt about NATO's Article 5 pledge, the very foundation of the transatlantic security apparatus. Russia does not hide its intent. It openly claims it is at war with NATO and Europe. This narrative is a central theme in its domestic propaganda to justify the full-scale invasion in Ukraine by portraying it as a resistance to Western expansionism. Again, we've said this previously. Washington searching for a quick end to the war, prioritizing speed, money and backroom deals over lasting peace. Moscow sees Europe as the main obstacle because it is the main obstacle in its continuation of support for Ukraine to resist and push back Russian advances. So, because Europe refuses to accept Kremlin's terms, that is why Kremlin is at war with Europe and NATO. Taken individually, each hybrid incident committed or sponsored by Russia has been calibrated. This is important to understand. These are not one-offs. These are not by accident. These are scheduled. They're calibrated to remain below thresholds that would trigger a stronger NATO-European reaction, yet alone trigger Article 5. Taken together, they reach the level of a sustained below-threshold hybrid war against Europe and NATO. Failing to acknowledge this reality makes truly effective and robust countermeasures to defer further escalation very difficult and risks opening the way for much worse scenarios. Weak reactions to Russia's aggression against Ukraine in 2014 and Georgia in 2008 have led us to where we are today. These are observations we have previously made. Yet Europe remains stuck in a bureaucratic inertia and political risk aversion. Internal divisions, slow decision-making, and a deeply legalistic peacetime mindset are preventing the EU and most of its member states from acknowledging the reality of a hybrid war, and continues to apply peacetime logic to an environment that is no longer peaceful, and an adversary that does not feel bound by agreed international law. We again have referred to these references. Europe must acknowledge it is engaged in a hybrid war with Russia. Fact. Only then can we use the full force and range of instruments available at our disposal. Europe is not ready for war. Again, an important fact. Decades of underspending, reliance on external security guarantors, chronic fragmentation in our industries, failure to set collaboration as the norm for industry and research, and dependence on foreign supplies has left Europe without capabilities, stockpiles and resilience required to deter a capable and determined aggressor like Russia. I appreciate that was quite a mouthful, but it's fact. I mean, we're not ready for war, and we need to get ready, even if it's only in defence. Ukraine's defence needs and lessons from its wartime innovations should be form the bedrock of future European defence investment strategies and be wholly integrated into European planning. Ukraine is the schoolbook, a way to learn how to defend, which it has done successfully, yes, with the support of NATO and Europe, but there are examples and real-life experiences to use in planning against a future invasion by Russia. Europe still behaves as if 27 separate defence markets can produce a coherent whole. This is not true. We have known for a long time it cannot. The continent operates dozens of tank types, fighter models, artillery systems and command structures, most incompatible with one another, and as a result a lot more expensive to maintain. Governments protect national champions even when they underperform, slowing consolidation and weakening competitiveness. Joint procurement and the standardization remain an exception rather than the rule. So, that's today's podcast. So from all of us here at the Centre for Russian Studies in Kiev, thank you. Share this podcast with your friends and those you think will be interested. The online address at YouTube is Russia Unmasked. We'll be back with more news from Kiev soon. Until then, Slav Ukraini. Ukrainians were, are and always will be here. Vladimir Zelensky. Thank you.